In the 1800s, the U.S. had obstacles expanding its territory. On April 30th, 1803, Thomas Jefferson decided to sign the Louisiana Purchase, which doubled the size of the U.S. Two U.S. veterans by the name of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark had stepped up to the challenge of exploring this new frontier. This exploration changed the U.S. by increasing the knowledge of their territory and propelling the fur trade and therefore the economy.
The journey of Lewis and Clark began with Napoleon over a vast sea. France was in great debt, and it was suggested to him that he sell the Louisiana Purchase to the United States. The price of 15 million was quickly settled on.
Of course, the United States had their sights on westward expansion since the end of the French and Indian War. On January 18th, 1803, Thomas Jefferson wrote a secret message to Congress. The letter asked for $2,500 to fund the expedition. At the time of the letter, the Louisiana Territory was not owned by the U.S. According to Lewis, in the year 1803, the United States was very drawn to the Louisiana Territory.
Thomas Jefferson's intention for the United States was to begin exploring past the famed Great Rock Mountains, which he wanted someone to explore as well as get more of an idea of the area. Two men by the name of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark had decided they wanted to step up to the challenge.
Before these two men decided that they wanted to explore the Louisiana Purchase, they were both military members and met through the Army. Lewis was also Jefferson's private presidential secretary. Before the expedition, they also recruited other men that were from Fort Mandan in Illinois. They'd also bought a Shoshone woman known as Sacagawea, who was the interpreter and guide for the expedition. They bought her from a French trader.
The things that were purchased with the 2,500 funds were things like a keelboat, other small riverboats, food, books of geography, books of biology, and many gifts for natives.
The expedition finally started May 14th, 1804, at the mouth of the Missouri River. They were using the exploration to help the president learn about the country's newly purchased land.
The Chinook speaking natives were the first to be encountered by Lewis and Clark.
Some of the native groups suffered from plagues such as smallpox after the leave of Lewis and Clark. They had no immunities, and the Mandans were nearly completely wiped out.
Many natives would trade with the newcomers, according to a note attached to a gift for a native tribe. Jefferson warned natives that the U.S. now had claim and knowledge of their land.
There were, however, many peaceful letters sent to Indian nations. A recovered letter to an Indian tribe that was written by Thomas Jefferson stated that he wanted peace and nothing more with the Indians in that area. He did, however, constantly refer to them as Indians.
Continuing up the Missouri River, the men started losing rations, and they depended on wild game. Lewis often patrolled the banks of the river as the boats battled the submerged sawyers and clumps of logs.
It was around this time that Jefferson made it clear that he wanted every minute detail of the expedition to be thoroughly recorded and sent back to the United States. While Lewis was on foot hunting on the Missouri, Clark was usually directing the boat through the submerged logs and debris unknown previously on the Mississippi that he was familiar with.
After rail water, dysentery, boils, blisters, and weather conditions, on June 26, 1804, they had crossed what would be Missouri and landed in what would become Kansas City. They even had the time to celebrate Independence Day with firing the artillery on the keelboat and saluting with whiskey.
Further on the expedition, they encountered the Teton Sioux, or the Lakota tribes. Jefferson had informed the men to bring nothing but peace to the tribe, but that proved rather difficult.
Trading with the Odo and Yankton tribes proved to be easy. However, some Teton Sioux stole the horse of John Coulter, who had just killed four elk. Although peace was necessary for both sides, neither was afraid to fight. The explorers gave the chief many presents. He received things like scarves, medals, medicine, a cocked hat, and a scarlet military cloak. The chief wanted more.
However, Captain Clark refused the request from Chief Partisan. He said, "I felt ready to draw my sword." Sioux knocked arrows, and Clark called reinforcements from the keelboat. However, the famous Black Buffalo chief saw the conflict, and the two men smoked the peace pipe with him. However, on the 28th of September, 1804, the men tried to leave, but the Teton Sioux demanded tobacco from them. Lewis was forced to throw tobacco overboard, and his boats were set free. Continuing further up the river, Lewis and Clark decided that the winter camp would be necessary in the harsh winter of Upper Missouri. They planned to camp at a Mandan village. Captain Clark said the timber in which we employ is large and heavy, and chiefly consists of cottonwood and elm.
On October 21st, when they arrived at Fort Mandan, Clark recorded rain freezing as it hit the ground. Additionally, on October 23rd, two Frenchmen were robbed by natives. However, staying close to the Mandams was generally helpful because of the newfound knowledge shared with the court.
In the winter camp, many hunting trips had to be postponed due to the cold. Even large herds of buffalo were seen crossing the frozen river at once. However, the weather at Mandan villages let Lewis and Clark create a detailed map of their exploration so far. During this day, they would go hunt with the Indians, where they would get a good amount of meat. They also had to keep the rest of the animal to make other things that they needed for the winter. Eventually, the frigid winter passed, and in the spring of 1805, some crew members journeyed back down the St. Louis River. According to a journal dated April 7th, 1805, Lewis and Clark left with two small canoes and a barge. 18-mile travel to the Great Falls was more difficult than expected for the explorers. Some of the drawbacks the explorers had when they were traveling was broken terrain, prickly pear cactus, hailstorms, and numerous grizzly bears. On July 4th, they decided to stop and celebrate Independence Day.
On August 17, 1805, they finally made it back with the Soshan tribe where Sacagawea could reunite with their family after being kidnapped at the age of 12. They got horses because they believed if they didn't get any horses, there was no way to make it back before the winter hit.
Months on the travel to the Pacific Ocean, they had many obstacles that were making it more difficult than they expected it to be. Lewis and Clark's men spread diseases to each other from overindulging on piles of dried fish and boiled roots. Some of their horses also ended up dying from slipping on the mountain and were being used as food to survive.
No, finally, on November 7th, after paddling their canoes down the Columbus River for many weeks, the Lewis and Clark expedition reached a dangerous estuary. The canoes had to be helped across the estuary by the local Clatsop Indians.
4 months before reaching the future town of Billings, Montana, the expedition left Fort Clatsop. Clark wrote, "We loaded our canoes at 1 p.m. and left Fort Clatsop on our homeward bound journey."
On April 1st, Clark talked to the natives about the sources of a river while hunters were gathering food past the Quicksand River. The natives also told Clark that the river was easy to navigate apart from rapids and waterfalls, according to a journal by Clark. At Billings, Montana, on the date of July 23rd, 1806, Clark climbed a large sandstone butte named it after Sacagawea's son. The sandstone pillar on the butte would be known as Pompey's Pillar.
Finally, 2 months later, on September 23rd, 1806, the Meriwether Lewis and William Clark expedition reached St. Louis, Missouri. The long journey took over 2 years. The men were assisted by natives, U.S. supplies, and most of all, Sacagawea. She was the navigator for the unknown territories, and the men would have surely been lost without her.
The Lewis and Clark expedition was one very successful trip that had multiple short and long term impacts on the United States. This journey also became very important as well as very well known throughout the history of early America. One important effect that this quest had was being able to be in agreement with some of the native tribes. This helped increase the amount of trade for today.
Following this up, it also increased fur trade dramatically and strengthened the U.S. claims to the Pacific Ocean. Lewis and Clark also gave valuable scientific and geographical information to land past the Appalachian Mountains. This gave enough knowledge to understand Western America.
Due to all the maps that Lewis and Clark and some of the other explorers drew and talked about, also helped people understand more about the agriculture. The journey didn't just discover new landforms, they also discovered new species of plants and animals. To be exact, they found 178 new species of plants and 122 new species of animals. This showed the people that the land was valuable and worth fighting to take it.
The Lewis and Clark expedition was an extraordinarily challenging journey that helped form the United States into what it is now. Without this expedition, homesteaders would have no knowledge of species, geography, or natives in their area. The measurable effects of the expedition include peace with tribes, land claims in the Northwest, expanded fur trade, and most of all, a broadened U.S. knowledge of the continent. This makes it the most valuable early American frontier of all.